Welcome to Santa Barbara Talks with Josh Molina. It's such a pleasure today to be here with somebody I've known for a long time, have a lot of respect for, somebody who's really important and integral in the community. And we just had the privilege of knowing him in all of his various roles. And we're going to talk about everything today. John Thyne, attorney John Thyne. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Josh. It's always nice to see you. So I hope you're well.
Yeah, thank you. We haven't really talked in a while, but I always enjoy when I run into you or we have coffee or something. We make time to have a conversation because you're everywhere and you have this great reputation in town and you do all these things in the community. You are an attorney, you're a teacher, you're a residential, real estate broker, you sell homes, you're a pundit, you're everywhere. And so
We do commercial real estate. Nick Welch uh, paid me a compliment, I think, in a recent article where he said the most ubiquitous person in Santa Barbara. I thought that was a nice way to say it. Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
I served as president of the University Club for many years. I'm still on that board. I'm the CFO of 1805, which is a local nonprofit for first responders. And we're getting ready to do our big festival on November 17th, which is exciting. And, just another big commitment right now, but things are great.
That's great. Yeah, it's just a pleasure to be able to have this talk. It's long overdue. So let's dive in, John. Recently, I wrote a story, a little short story about your move downtown, and you've experienced an expansion. So can you talk a little bit about you? I mean, I think that a while ago, you were the residential real estate, commercial real estate guy, the broker.
Yeah.
You have your own firm too. Talk to me about John Tyne, the attorney, and all the worlds you're involved with right now.
Sure. So yeah, for many, many years, Kevin Goodwin and I, Goodwin and Thyne Properties, we have the building over at 2000 State Street, right there at the corner of State and Mission. And in that building, we were housing Goodwin and Thyne Properties, our real estate brokerage, which does, as you say, residential and commercial real estate throughout Santa Barbara County and really all the way down to LA and all the way up to San Luis Obispo. We're sort of Central Coast centric. And we also had the law offices, John J. Thyne III there. And over the years, both organizations have kind of continued to grow. And Goodwin and Thyne Properties has gone from 2 agents, Goodwin and Thyne, to 16 agents now that are in Santa Barbara. We have agents in LA, we have agents in other areas, but in Santa Barbara, we have 16 agents. Meanwhile, the law offices, John J. Thyne III, grew, and we had 4 lawyers there, myself, Justin Fox, Lacey Taylor, and Jerry Howard. And so things were getting a little bit tight in that location. So I did last July come down to a block from the courthouse, and I made my associate attorneys partners. And so we now have a law firm called Thyne Taylor Fox Howard LLP, and that is located at 205 East Carrillo Street. So we're at the corner of Carrillo and Santa Barbara. And we still have Goodwin and Thyne Properties over at 2000 State Street. So I sort of run between the 2 offices. But thank God for Zoom,
Right.
which makes that travel a little bit easier today. So yes, we're very much enjoying the new office, but we still have both companies going in full steam ahead.
Great. I want to talk about your attorney work in a second, but let's talk about your expertise in residential and commercial real estate. And we'll start with residential. As we know, in last year, since the pandemic, year and a half, the residential real estate market has boomed. If you own a house, it's the value of it has been soaring, and we're seeing sort of that not being affected negatively by the pandemic. In fact, quite the inverse. So can you talk a little bit about where we at today with that residential real estate boom and what's ahead and what are the factors there?
Absolutely. So yes, you're absolutely correct. During the pandemic, we saw a major explosion in residential real estate in Santa Barbara. The house values went up precipitously throughout the pandemic and after, to the extent we are after the pandemic. And it really reached an apex, I would say, in about April or May of this year. Uh, in April, May, we had our lowest number of days on market for sold real estate. I'm just kind of looking at the stats here. Our absorption rate was very fast. Things were staying on the market for less than 30 days. In fact, the number of days on market had dipped down to its lowest point. We were seeing multiple offers on every listing. It really didn't matter where the listing was in price, whether it was $15 million or it was $1.2 million. It didn't matter where it was geographically, if it was in San Roque or if it was in Montecito. It was just almost too much. I think anybody who was involved as a real estate broker or agent in the residential real estate market in Santa Barbara over the last 2 years will tell you that they have probably worked more than ever in their career. And each transaction would have multiple offers, and they would come in. I'm thinking of one in particular. We had sold a house to a client who had an intention of improving it and selling it later. And she bought the house for about $1,000 a square foot on Chapala Street, 1.495. You know, it was about a 1,489 square foot home on Chapala Street a year ago. Had completely renovated, put a lot of money into it, made it absolutely stunningly beautiful, but didn't increase the square footage. It just made a beautiful house, and put it back on the market in February, and it sold immediately for $1,850 a square foot on Chapala between Constance and Mission. So, I mean, it's just, you know, it was a bit daunting to see prices like that here in town. And there's a positive side of that, and of course a negative side of that. Your question though was, where are we now? And so since April and May, we have seen a little bit of, I would say, thinking about a baseball, if you were to throw a baseball in the air, that's kind of been our residential market here for the last 2 years. The baseball has just been flying up into the air. And right now where we are is the baseball is sort of suspended in flight, right? We're seeing days on market sort of increase in some listings. We're seeing prices start to come down a little bit on list prices or asking prices. So we're not in a correction right now, I wouldn't say. But what we are seeing is through the market itself, if you bring a property market that is very fairly priced in a desirable neighborhood in good condition, it's still going to sell immediately. And for more than probably you ever would have imagined just even 6 to 8 months ago. And certainly more than 2 years ago. But it's the properties that the sellers have been kind of pushing the price a little too high, or maybe they're not in as great a condition. We are starting to see now that those homes, while they would have sold in May immediately, they are taking a little bit longer now to get through the system and to sell. Though I would tell you it's still a very hot market right now.
And why was that? Were people looking to get out of LA or these second homes? What were the factors? Why was there all of a sudden an even greater interest in buying in Santa Barbara?
It's a really great question. Lots of factors went into it, right? There was a lot of pent-up demand because after the pandemic began, there was an initial pullback. Everybody was sort of just staying at home and laying low and trying to figure out what this global pandemic was going to look like to them personally. There's a lot of fear. So there was a bit of pent-up demand to begin with. You know, historically, our market is generally about 75% local. Right, 75% of our transactions normally in a typical market are going to be sold to people who are moving across town or who are having life changes, divorces, deaths, things of that nature, and are making a change within the town. And 25% of our market generally comes from out of the area, of which the vast majority was coming from Los Angeles and the surrounding areas. Over the past 2 years, we've seen a little bit of a shift in that, where only about 60% of our transactions have been purely local. 40% being from out of the area. And of that 40, a lesser amount was coming from LA than historically. And so we've seen an influx really into Santa Barbara and particularly into Montecito of people from all over the country, and the world, actually, all over the world, particularly, the prince from England. And so we've seen people from all over the globe come here. And so Santa Barbara is a very desirable market. It was actually the market in California that increased the most during the pandemic. There was money that was readily available to some buyers that wasn't historically there. We had a lot of government programs that, pushed money into the economy, and some of that money percolated to the top, if you will. And so it afforded some people an opportunity to move to Santa Barbara, something they've always wanted to do. And so there was no better time for them. The stock market, of course, was performing exceptionally well, and people were making a great deal of money by trading there and having the ability to buy in Santa Barbara. So there were a number of factors that have gone into this this robust market that we've seen.
Yeah. I want to ask you about renting in a second, but while we're on home buying, I wanted to ask you about what I wrote about, which has been controversial in the news. This company called Pacaso that is facilitating people buying not fractional ownership, but buying an eighth of ownership of a home, and they're second homes, so people can be here a certain amount of days a year, and they share that with other people. And there's at least one community that we know of up on the Riviera that is very upset about this, because it's not your typical neighbor, they would say, and it lends itself to people moving in who aren't necessarily invested in the community. But this Pacaso company's got a lot of attention for what they're doing in other communities, and praised to some degree for being innovative and figuring out a way to say, well, rather than having this place just sort of vacant most of the year and some family using it for 3 months, it's going to be occupied by multiple families throughout the year. And that's a way of not having a house sitting vacant. So there's lots of ways to sort of interpret this, but I was sort of interested in your thoughts on that idea of a company facilitating buying second homes and what that means to a community.
And it is fractional ownership, actually. It truly is. That's what their business is structured on. I think they create an LLC, and the LLC owns property, and then people buy into the LLC.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. It's not timeshares. That's what they were saying.
Timeshare, right? But it is fractional ownership, and which is a distinction, actually, that they are in fact invested in the community in a sense, because they are owners of that property. There's two sides of every coin, right? When condominiums were first popular in America, there was a lot of pushback on that. People thought that was a crazy avant-garde sort of different way to own property, and they pushed back on it. We had co-ops prior to that, which was more similar to a fractional ownership. And condominiums really are essentially fractional ownership, at least of the common areas, and then there's individual ownership of the individual units. And so, I think people fear change. People inherently just see something new and they get concerned by it, and there's an initial pushback. But I think that the point is well taken, that this can be very, very positive for communities. And if you were to have, say, 8 buyers in the $1.5 million range who were all able to buy a second home in Santa Barbara for the purposes of staying there throughout the year, but not all year long, there are 8 homes that might come off the market in a part of the market that is really one where there's a lot of competition and a lot of need, with younger families or with folks who aren't in that upper echelon in terms of pricing. Whereas if you took those same 8 individuals and you pulled their resources together and you had them buy a house that was far more expensive, and again, not necessarily a home that the people who are competing in that price range would be trying to purchase themselves, and to your point, a home that now would be occupied all of the year, at least the vast majority of the year, there's a lot of reasons to say that's a better approach and that is innovative. And obviously, um, to the extent it creates opportunities to take those homes that otherwise are being underused and to sell them to this group of individuals who come in and buy them, that generates tax revenue for the county and for the city that might not be gained. You have a home that's sitting there, maybe has been owned for decades and is at a very low property tax rate, and then it gets sold to this company or to this group of individuals. That creates a reassessment, and that taxes that home at a highly inflated rate compared to what it was bringing in terms of property taxes. And so, I think that the argument that, oh, well, this is going to be people that are on vacation all the time. Like, yes, the home will be occupied all year, but it'll be occupied by
partiers.
Right? Yeah, partiers, if you will. And I've read that article about the alleged party that occurred, and the other side of that saying, well, it was our daughter's 21st birthday, and we had the music off by 9 p.m. and all that. There are rules and laws that will apply to that. It doesn't have to be a home that is fractional ownership to have a problem occupant, right? I have plenty of cases that involve neighbors who act badly that have owned their home for decades, and so I'm not certain that is that there's any more likelihood that there'll be a problem just because there's a fractional ownership. The argument could be made that this is something they work toward in their life and they're really happy to acquire it, and they treat it very well. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think there's both sides to the coin. Personally, I think it's not a bad way to trade property, and it actually pushes these people into an area in the market that has less competition, and that isn't taking away 8 homes from the part of the market where we really need inventory. So
yeah, and that's a good point. Is that could be 8 these people could have bought 8 other homes, and then you have 8 neighborhoods that potentially could be adversely impacted. Yeah, so that's what it is. And of course, there's always that thing of people complaining who have homes that other people can't exercise some form of property rights. It's sort of like, well, just because you have yours doesn't mean other people can't try to do their best to have theirs too, as long as they're doing it the right way. So that's always, that's the Santa Barbara story, right? Everybody wants new housing. Nobody wants it near them, So.
Yeah.
But along those lines, let's talk about residential in Santa Barbara. Of course, there was that proposal for rent stabilization, I think is what they were calling it. Others were calling it rent control, but it was essentially putting a cap on how much that the owners could raise raise rents. And that, of course, gets people all worked up because Santa Barbara is in this place of there's not enough housing for everybody who works here. The state is increasingly putting demands on the city. They have to zone for 8,001 units by 2031 or something, and they have to build them, but they got to say, here's where they could go. So there's all these things going on. What about
the state went further, right, with Senate Bill 9 and Senate Bill 10, where they've essentially done away with single family zoning in California, where they've said, look, if you own an R1 property, you now have the ability to subdivide that property as long as the 2 resulting lots are at least 40% of the original lot. In other words, you can do a 60-40 split, you can do a 50-50 split, you could not do an 80-20 or a 90-10, or something of that nature. And then once you've done that, you can build a main home and an ADU on each of the lots. And so you're turning an R1 property into 4 different units on a residential lot. And the state has mandated that and made it ministerial review, and cities and counties essentially can't push back on that. And there's restrictions on how far a setback could be. So it can only be 4 feet now instead of 5 or 10 or more. And there's a lot of misunderstanding about that. People assume, oh, well, Santa Barbara's kind of exempt because there's this part of the law that talks about high fire zones, and we're all in a high fire zone here, and so we're exempt. That's not correct. if you look at that part of the law closely, it actually says, yeah, high fire zones are exempted unless the community has adopted a mitigation strategy, which we have. And so that's not an exemption for Santa Barbara from these rules. So there is that. There is, of course, there's people trying to cap rents. It is well intentioned. It never ever works. It just doesn't work. And that's unfortunate. The reality of the situation is most of my clients who are landlords have not raised rents on their tenants for years and years and years, and are only doing so now because they're saying, well, we can't afford to fall behind and make our property less valuable because we're not at market rents anymore. So now they're being told, well, you can only go 2% plus CPI or 5% plus CPI and capped at 10%. Well, that has been largely a toothless tiger because CPI has come up so much now, right? And so in essence, today, it's all 10%, right? You can go up 10% per year, basically. And there's lots of exceptions and there's a lot of nuances that we can't really get into. I did see your interview with Peter, which was outstanding.
Peter Rupert, yeah.
Issue. Yeah, Peter Rupert, and just excellent. I mean, excellent analysis. But the reality of the situation is, it just doesn't work. It disincentivizes maintenance of properties and improving properties because now you're capping the amount of money that property can generate, so you have less money to improve the property, and there's all sorts of reasons. That's a much longer conversation. So,
what do you think of the city's affordable housing strategy? And I'm not talking about the housing authority and what they call the capital A traditional affordable housing, but their efforts to create AUD units, give developers higher density. Hopefully they'll build more smaller units, which will be rented at something less expensive than something big and it's below market. Of course, there's much controversy about that because even if they're small, they're going to go for several $1,000s a month, in rent. If you were mayor, if you were, the community development director, and you were directly influencing these things, what would you say is like, what's the best way to build housing for the middle, the people who aren't rich?
I have that answer. I should be mayor or president, right?
Yeah.
That is our challenge, isn't it? I mean, Santa Barbara, we don't have more land. We don't have an opportunity to just throw up these large moderate income housing projects that will allow some relief in that part of the market that is so overburdened right now. And so infill projects have been the AUD that you referred to, not to be confused by ADU, which is the state's sort of answer to that, which is a similar concept, which is higher density, as you've just indicated. I don't know that it's a Rubik's Cube that's ever going to be solved in Santa Barbara, right? Because there's the other argument that, well, if you build it, they will come, that the more affordable housing that we have here, the more people will move here, the more tax and or the more burden we'll have on our community, the less like Santa Barbara it will feel because we've become particularly dense, which is one of the things that people love about this community is that it's not like that. Which I think is why people push back a lot on this Senate Bill 8 and Senate Bill 9 and 10 with the IADUs. The answer is obviously it is a supply and demand conundrum. You have more demand than we have supply. And there's two ways to address that. One, reduce the demand, which we've sort of done, right? Over the years by not having huge industries here in town. We haven't historically had big industries for people to come to Santa Barbara to work in, right? It's not a place that people think of first when they say, oh, I need a job, I'll apply to Santa Barbara, right? In fact, if anything, we have trouble recruiting people for positions here. I certainly have had trouble recruiting people, despite the fact that I did finally successfully hire another attorney, which is good. So we're at 6, but housing is hard, right? And unless the employer is providing the housing, it is tough to recruit people out of town here, you'll have to pay them enough to sustain themselves with housing. So one way that we've dealt with it is we've sort of tried to stifle the demand by really not being a magnet for business and things of that nature. And then the other answer, of course, that you're talking about, the supply side of things, is to build more stock, have more housing stock. And that's, I think, why the city cracks down on short-term rentals a lot, why they are trying to incentivize people to not have empty buildings or empty homes and all of that. But it's been interesting to watch, right? It's an issue with a lot of emotion, not just on two sides, but on, multifaceted issue, because the less housing you have, the more people commute, so that's a bigger impact on the environment. But the more density you have, that also creates more of an impact on our local environment. And so it's a tough question. I support having affordable housing. I have found that the way that I've seen it work best is in public-private partnerships, where the city has gotten together with maybe developers and investors and has developed things like Casa Fuentes over on Carrillo, where you have the city get involved in creating affordable housing, and you incentivize the investors and you incentivize the developers to participate with you, and then the city sort of controls it and makes sure that it goes to truly moderate income individuals. So that's the thing I've seen work best, is public-private collaboration.
Downtown, State Street, promenade, cars, bikes, pedestrians.
Right.
Right now, we know they're watching.
I'm right here.
You're right there, right?
2 blocks away.
What do what's the solution for us? Do you like how it looks downtown? Do you want to wait 12 years for the master plan to be done? That's an exaggeration.
I'm a fan of the promenade, to be honest with you. I've been here now 23 years in Santa Barbara. I moved here in 1999. I used to love spending a lot of time on State Street, and did for many, many years. And then when we had our economic calamity globally, State Street sort of suffered a bit. You recall all the stories that ran about vacant storefronts and things of that nature. We had some challenges with homelessness and things of that nature. And I do think that the promenade, to use that term, has brought people back downtown, has brought families, has brought visitors, has brought even, I would say, locals who may not have been on State Street for years, have come down and found themselves enjoying what we have to offer, right? We have this beautiful European downtown look with a climate that is the envy of the world. And so I didn't think that having the cars back and forth on State Street, because we didn't have parking for those vehicles, right? So you can go to some communities, Glendale, I was in this past weekend, really cute, downtown areas where they have a main drag, if you will, and there's lots of nice shops along the way. You have retail, you have bakeries, you have restaurants, you have services, hair, barbers and hairdressers and the like, manicurists, and they have parking in front of those businesses. And so there, it makes sense, right, to have the street open to vehicles, because those cars will come, they can park, and folks can go right in and enjoy the services and maybe walk a couple blocks of that. We've never really on State Street had that, right? We've never really had anywhere that you could park on State Street. You'd have to go to Paseo Nuevo and park in the garage there, or you'd be parking on the arteries outside of State Street. So we haven't had much of a change other than maybe the path of travel for vehicles, but the fundamental experience isn't much different, because you would have been parking somewhere else and walking to State Street to walk on State Street, right? To go to these shops anyway. So I personally embrace it. I like it. I don't think Randy's as big a fan of it. I think
he wants to clean underneath there. There's those vermin problems.
Yeah, I would like to maybe, bring it in a couple blocks, is what I understand. But I think the overall that the council likes what they see. And I will just tell you, as a citizen walking around State Street, I've enjoyed seeing the bikes instead of the cars, seeing the pedestrians instead of the vehicles. So
Yeah, and that 500 block is, you know, to your tourist, I don't think there's anybody coming and saying, "Oh, this looks awful." I think they're like, "Wow, there's so much cool stuff to do. There's so many places to eat, and it's
Right.
vibrant." You know, and of course the
Sorry, the
locals.
500 block you're talking about?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, the 500 block with all the restaurants. You know, I think people who go down there are like, "Wow, this is fun." Yes, from an aesthetic perspective and the HLC, there's some things that you know need to be done. You know, from a Santa Barbara standard, but you know, I'm not down there much, but when I'm down there, everyone seems to be having a really good time.
You got Yona Reds with their queso tacos down there, 532 State Street. How do you go wrong? Right?
Exactly. Yeah, he's
They're
doing great.
awesome.
He's
Yeah.
doing great. Hey,
And
let's talk.
it's a great story, isn't it? I mean, so there's a perfect example. So 532 State Street for many, many years had been the Zia Cafe, for decades. And then there was a transfer of ownership between the spouses, and one of the spouses opened a new restaurant called Verve, I think it was, there. And then ultimately a steakhouse, is what he was operating there. And then he had a French concept come in, and they were doing wine and cheese and things like that. And it just wasn't catching on. It wasn't catching fire. And then when the promenade came, we had a local guy who had been selling queso tacos from a cart, for years. Everybody loved them. Everybody supported him. They encouraged him to go out and to get a physical location. He opens up at 532 State Street, Yona Reds, and he's doing amazing.
Yeah.
Right? He's doing great. Visitors and locals alike will come down, and you do have a parking lot right back behind there. And so, yeah, it's a great example of a building that otherwise wasn't really functioning all that well, that now is a hotspot of sorts.
Yeah, it's a good success story. And, I know the landlord there's been working well, and sort of being flexible, and at least at the beginning. And that's what you need to do. You want good tenants. You need to work with them on, well, how do we make this work, as opposed to, some of these places sitting vacant for forever, So I think it pays to have a local owner in that case of that building.
Certainly.
Hey, John, let's talk about some of your law work. And I'll just sort of lay it on the line a little bit here. You recently represented Christy Lozano to get in her efforts to get on the ballot after there was a rather, and I mean, this is no surprise, very foolish challenge to her, politically foolish, I'll say, as a pundit of,
Sure.
Just doesn't look good. You're trying to, this person supposedly is not a threat, but yet you're going to sue to not have her on the ballot.
Right.
That's a bad look. If you really think your team's more qualified, well, let her run and let things happen, and it wasn't like she was off the street. She did have, a case, as you eloquently made in court.
Right.
So I thought that was sort of foolish. Like, don't do that. Like, just let her run. If the
I
county
totally
assessor,
that's why I stepped up. That's exactly why I stepped up on that. Is that some folks had brought, I didn't know her. I had never met her before. People had come to me with their concerns and had said that she was, a school teacher who had the credential, who had put her name in the hat and had filed her candidate papers to serve as superintendent, and that there was a legal challenge made. And the legal challenge, although it was filed in the name of a local resident, clearly that was not the person really behind the challenge. I'm sure she supported the idea of not having this individual be elected, but it was something that had come from out of our city, with a big law firm in Sacramento who, does a lot of these types of cases. And I looked at it and I said, yeah, that seems unjust. Seems like we have outside influence coming to Santa Barbara, trying to influence our elections. And to your point, keeping somebody off the ballot is a cheap way to win.
Mm-hmm.
If, competition is healthy, I'm certainly a big proponent of that. Competition is good for the consumer. And so really there ought to be more choices, not less choices, right?
Yeah.
So they brought me the case and I looked at it and I researched the law, and I felt strongly that the case was ill-advised, as you said, not just politically, but legally, that they did not have solid grounds to challenge this candidacy. What was interesting and maybe not known as much is that one of the reasons that they argued against Ms. Lozano's name being on the ballot is they said, well, Atherton County, the registrar of voters in Atherton County also had this very same question, where they had a teacher who had the credential, had not pulled the credentials yet, because you can't pull them until you have an administrative job, and was trying to run for superintendent. And that registrar of voters made the decision to keep him off the ballot. And so this Sacramento firm had argued in Santa Barbara County that we ought to follow Atherton's lead on that. And I had been in touch with the attorney for that candidate, actually. And he had said, well, we're thinking of legally challenging, and we're sort of sitting back and waiting to see how you do in your defense of this issue before we file an affirmative claim to get him onto the ballot. And so we did go forward, and we were successful in defending, in defending Joe Holland's position, which was the right position, which was, hey, more candidates, not less. This person is qualified. This person does have the credentials necessary to serve if elected. There is plenty of time for her to pull those credentials if she's elected to the position. So he made the decision to allow her candidacy to stand. He was vindicated in court. He had made the right choice. The judge agreed with his choice. And then the candidate in Atherton hired me to come up there and to bring an affirmative action challenging that registrar of voters decision. And interestingly, I think that the same firm was involved, though they didn't file pleadings in that particular instance. And we were successful there as well. So we were successful in Santa Barbara County, and we were successful in Atherton County to have the candidate's name on the ballot. And I believe that the candidate in Atherton County was elected, was successful in that election. Yeah. And people had asked me, they said, well, what was the political leanings of that candidate? I don't know. I don't know. I was arguing the legal propriety of letting the candidate stand. I don't know what he stood for. I didn't know much about Christy Lozano, what she stood for. I like Christy very much, but it didn't matter to me, and it doesn't matter, and it shouldn't matter to anybody. I didn't care if she was a liberal or a libertarian or an independent or a Republican or what her affiliation was. It was just wrong to try to keep her off the ballot.
Yeah. And I think it was a political misstep because it elevated her status. I mean, all of a sudden people were talking about her, and in the game of politics, you don't want people talking about your opponent.
No such news is bad news. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it made her have, the appearance that she was being wrong, that there was this democratic machine.
I would say it wasn't just the appearance. She was being wronged. She was being wronged, and we righted that. Yeah.
And I guess the question I guess I want to ask you, John, is you're smart and you know all this stuff. And I know, you said you liked Christy, and then afterward you supported her, and I mean, when you look at those credentials, though, you look at Susan Salcido's credentials and years of experience. If you take partisan politics out of it, she's not a Democrat, but just the experience, and you have Christy. I mean, wouldn't you hire Susan? Like, isn't that an easy? No disrespect to Christy, but just on the experience level.
No, I would say that in my career, in my experience, in my life, I have hired many people that were less experienced than other candidates I considered. Yeah. And that they brought fresh perspective to the job. They brought creativity that was lacking in the position. Not to say that I have to admit, I wasn't totally involved in this particular office of superintendent prior to being brought in as the attorney to address the election issue. So I'm not castigating anybody. But I would push back on the idea that somebody without experience is unqualified per se. I disagree with that perception, right? And if you want to go into Trump, we could certainly, no, let's not do that. Let's not do that.
No.
No, I don't.
We don't have time for that.
Yeah, exactly. I don't believe that it's simply a question of experience, right? Then it would just be a coronation from one to the other and just pass the baton right down the line of administrators that have held the position and had the job for a long time. And it's a social promotion type of a position then versus, having candidates that come with different perspectives. So yeah, no, I have voted for many candidates over the years who lacked experience.
Yeah.
And I've voted for many that had tons of experience. So
okay. All right, fair enough. Let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about you, John. You let's go back to the beginning. This is like the flashback in the feature story. If I were writing about you, John Thyne was born in a small town. No, I don't know. Tell me a little about your upbringing.
Boston, not so small.
Boston, okay. Your upbringing and how you decided you wanted to go into law.
It's interesting, and I'm not sure how much time we have, but I was very fortunate, I would say, that we were very poor when I was born. And my father and my mother got married very young. Dad was not a stellar student, though he was extremely intelligent, or is. My dad's still alive. My mom's still alive. Thank God for that, for both of them. And they're still together after 56 years of marriage. So not only are they both alive, but they haven't killed each other, which is great. They married very young, both from extremely, poor families, I would say. Dad lived in Roxbury, Massachusetts, which is a not so great area of Boston, although it has gone through a recent renovation and it's sort of like Hell's Kitchen did in New York and became actually quite trendy and really nice and all that stuff, but it was not so for many, many years. And mom lived nearby, and they met. They actually had met a year before. He asked her to dance. She had said no, and it was like a year later he saw her in the same club and asked her to dance, and she was upset with her friends, and they wanted to leave. She didn't, so she said yes only to be on the dance floor, so they couldn't drag her out of there. And that, one thing led to another, and they ended up getting married. 18, 19 years old. Had me 9 months and 2 weeks after the wedding, so I'm a honeymoon baby. Over the course of the next 9 years, they had 6 children, 3 boys, 3 girls, very Brady life. Mm-hmm. And Dad was loading trucks at Sears Roebuck at the time, and there was a lot of strife. I won't out myself too badly here, I hope, on my age, but it was the late 60s. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of labor and management disputes, and there was a lot of picketing going on. And my dad had crossed the picket line at the, with the permission of the guys that were picketing. He would literally work and then come outside and picket with them. But he had to, support a young family, and he couldn't afford not to have the time. Well, he ended up getting promoted because he had a perfect attendance record. And there was a whole long story behind that. He actually went to the union and talked to them and said, hey, I've got this offer of management, but I know that the only reason I'm getting this offer is because you guys have allowed me to cross the picket line. So I'm going to ask for your blessing before I take the job. And so, really smart way to give credit where credit was due to people. And there was, we talk about this fractional interest thing and the way that people are pushing back on that. At that time, you didn't hire from within the ranks. You hired graduates out of Harvard, and you made them the managers, and you let the laborers be the laborers, and you didn't make a laborer a manager. And there was this forward-thinking regional director who said, we have an average lifespan of 6 months of these managers coming from Harvard. Sears Roebuck at the time was basically like the Costco or the Amazon of its day. It was the place that everybody went to do much of their retail. And so this regional director took a chance on hiring somebody from within, to the dismay of all the other regional directors who said, you're a crazy person putting somebody from labor into management, and did it. And it worked out brilliantly because my dad was able to bring a fresh perspective of labor while also achieving the goals that management wanted. And he had ended up turning around that warehouse from one of the worst performing warehouses in the entire organization to the best in a short period of time. And that sort of launched him. He actually got written up in the trades as a result and got recruited to go to Chicago and work for Ann Page supermarkets and did some great things there, and then got recruited to work for First National Supermarkets in Connecticut. And so we went there, and eventually he found himself hired by Pepsi Cola. And so he went there, and he advanced with Pepsi for many years, and ultimately became senior vice president of Pepsi Cola without ever having gone to college. Oh. Meanwhile, my mom raised 6 children, largely by herself, but not really. I mean, dad was there, but she certainly took the yeoman's share of that work. And we moved 17 times at that time. I went to college at the University of Connecticut. I paid for school myself because by that point my parents weren't yet finished with their journey of rags to riches, say. And so I went to the in-state school because we lived in Ridgefield, Connecticut at the time, and I went to become a priest. I had thought that that's what I would do with my life. I couldn't get past the concept of not having a family, though, and being married and having children potentially someday. And so I had a priest that I was consulting with at the time who said to me, you can serve the church in many ways without being a member of the cloth. And so I decided that the next most noble profession would be medicine. And so I actually graduated with a degree in biology and English. I couldn't let go of the English language. I just loved literature and poetry and writing and all of that. And so I graduated, planned on taking the MCATs, interned at Hartford Hospital in Connecticut, and watched all of these young doctors kind of, not see their kids, cheating on their wives with these nurses, living terribly stressful times and all that stuff. And I said, well, I don't want to give up the priesthood in favor of family and then enter such an anti-family thing. Now, that's the logic of a 20-year-old, right? Because I was looking at young doctors in their residencies who were totally overworked anyway. Obviously, there's lots of wonderful doctors who don't do those things and don't have that kind of lifestyle. But at the time, I thought it would be antithetical to a family. And so I ended up moving home with my parents. At that time, they lived in Plano, Texas. So I decided not to sit for the MCATs. I went home, Plano, Texas, and mom at that point said, hey, I've spent 30 years raising children. I'd like to go and get an education of my own. She decided to go to the community college in Collin County Community College in Texas. My brother TJ, who's an actor, he's on the show Bones for 12 years. He's done many movies and lots of television and all that. He was in his senior year of high school. And he said, well, Mom, this is my last year home. I want to spend time with you. So I'll come with you to the community college. And I said, well, guys, I'm home from college, and I want to spend some time. I don't know how long I'll be home. Let me go. So I also went with them to the community college. But the only 2 classes that I could take that I didn't have already were logic and introduction to law. And it just turned out that I got the highest grade in both classes. The introduction to law professor was a judge. She prevailed upon me to take the law school admission tests. She even in the conversation said, listen, I'll pay for it. And I go, no, judge, I've got money, I can pay for it. And I was like, but I can't be a lawyer. I was going to be a priest. I can't go into law. And she's like, no, that's what we need. We need ethical, good people to come into this profession. She said, I'm a judge. I can order you to take this test. And so I said, I appreciate it. It's okay. I'll take it. And so I ended up taking law school admission tests because she told me that she saw something in me that she thought would be, I'd be very good for this profession and this profession would be good for me. And I was fortunate in that I scored in the top 4% of the country. And so I got recruited by, a number of schools. I ended up going not local, but close to the University of Tulsa College of Law because they offered me a year early. So I literally started classes a week after I got my results. And I figured that was a way to get back a year of my life. And I had intended to transfer to Yale after my first year because they had offered me, all the schools had offered the top 5% of the score getters an opportunity to matriculate with them. And I ended up liking Tulsa. I found it was a very easy place to live. I thought the people were very nice there. It was a really different pace for me. I'd always lived in sort of cities and suburbs of cities, and this was just something altogether different for me. It was as far west as I'd ever lived, and it was interesting. And so, yeah, I went to the University of Tulsa College of Law. I was the Student Bar Association president. I was, in the top 10% of my class, and did well there, practiced law there for a few years, ultimately went to work for the federal government. And as a young lawyer, that sort of is like dipping your resume in gold. And so I was able to interview all around the country, and actually had come out to California to interview with Disney, where my other brother, not the actor, but the animator, was the supervisor of feature animation, and went through a couple rounds there, got right up into it. And they figured the nepotism was too much. And so I answered a classified ad for Santa Barbara, and I saw the town and said, that's it.
Oh,
That's where the train stops. This is my last move. And
wow.
1999.
What an amazing story. Like all the different elements that you described there, from your father and, your mother and your siblings and all your work in the middle. Wow, that's a book. Hopefully you're going to be able to do that someday. Hey, I want to ask you about the priesthood. What was it? Did you grow up religious, or what was it that attracted you to that kind of lifestyle, to consider that?
Well, I mean, I'm an Irish Italian Catholic from Boston. We certainly, yes, I grew up religious. I was an altar boy until I was 19 years old. When I first moved to Santa Barbara, I was involved with Our Lady of Sorrows Church as a Eucharistic minister for a while, and then a lector, and then on the parish council. And so, yeah, I mean, I just, I was fortunate not to have a bad experience with religion in my life. I think moving every 2 years sort of kept us away from a lot of influences that other people might experience in their life. And it was always a positive place for me. And I think the messages are good, that we are here to make life better for one another, and compassion, and the Beatitudes, feed the poor, feed the hungry, and shelter the unsheltered. And I don't know, I was just very, I was a Boy Scout, I was the outstanding Scout of the Year in 1982. I mean, I don't know, it was just the ethos that I grew up with. And I think religion can be very positive in people's lives.
Yeah. Well, we've almost been here an hour, John. Let's wrap up. Although I think we could probably talk for 2 hours at least, and we should
talk
do it
about how
again.
I met my wife. That'd be another 20 minutes. So,
yes. Well, I do follow you on Facebook, so I do see that you look very happy, John. I'll leave it at that. But what's next? What are you doing now? You obviously are in a great phase of your life with your expansion, your development. You've been successful a long time, but what are you working on? What are we going to be seeing John Thyne focused on in the next few years?
I'm not sure that I've thought it out or mapped it out that far. I think Santa Barbara is the most extraordinary county, most extraordinary community that I've been in my lifetime, and I've been fortunate to travel the world and be exposed to a lot of different communities. And I think that this is just an extraordinary place, and all of us that get the opportunity to live here and work here and play here, we're just really among the most fortunate people on earth. And I would say, what's in store is I'm going to continue to do my best to pay homage to that by enjoying it and making it a better community to the best of my ability, and whatever form that takes, whether it's helping the person next to me, carry a bag, or do something bigger. I mean, I don't have plans for the future necessarily, other than to just continue on the path that has really been so exciting and blessed here in town.
Yeah. And I'm sure at some point you're going to be some kind of elected official, because I know you have that itch. And when the timing's right, I'm sure you'll strike. So
yeah, I mean, I ran for council in 2009. At that time, it made sense. It hasn't made sense really since. As I mentioned, I thought about mayor this time. But yeah, the way I see it is what I described earlier, though. Public service is exactly that, right? It's a service to the public. And if you're going into it for any reason other than that, I'm not sure that you're really right for the job, so to speak.
Yeah. Hey, I don't want to leave what you said hanging in the context of how much you valued sort of family. Why don't you tell us the story a little bit about how you met your wife and
Oh,
how
yeah,
life
time.
changing that was for you? We can go a little bit longer if you have time, or you
Uh,
can, but
sure. No, if
yeah,
you're okay with it.
yeah.
Well, I was with a friend of mine here in Santa Barbara, and he wanted to take a trip, and he wanted to go to Russia. And I said, Russia of all places, why would you want to go to Russia? I mean, let's go to South America. It's warm and women don't wear a lot of clothing there. And so he was like, "No, I really want to go there. It's so historically significant. It's a good time right now." This was 2007, when relations were better. And so I said, okay. And I was traveling with my friend, and we went to Moscow. We spent several days there, but we found that we were two young, dumb American guys in a foreign speaking country that didn't know anything. And so we ended up hiring a tour guide. And when we hired the tour guide, it changed everything. Our entire experience in Moscow was much, much better because we had somebody who lived there who happened to speak English and Russian, who was able to show us the city and show us things we never would have found on our own. So when we went to St. Petersburg, we did the same. We hired a tour guide, and that tour guide happened to be Olesya. And so, obviously there was an initial interest on my part that, she's just a stunningly beautiful woman. But I tell people all the time, who say how pretty she is, I say, it's true. She's stunningly gorgeous, but that's about the fourth best thing about her, and that was true. I just found her just so interesting and knowledgeable, and her English was perfect. And I came to learn later that she had taught herself how to speak English. It wasn't formal study or anything. She literally taught herself using song lyrics and a dictionary.
Oh,
And so anyway, I'd asked her on a date. We went out. And she said yes. And then I said, well, can you bring a friend for my friend? And she said, okay. And so we went on a double date that night, and she and I ended up walking around until 4 a.m, touring the city and talking. And we spent several days just kind of talking and getting to know each other and stuff. And then I went back to America, and this was '07, so there was no Facebook or Skype or any of that. And we
mhm.
just were friends. We just would email and all that. And we stayed in touch over email over the years. And eventually Facebook came around and Skype came around. And we found ourselves 3 years later, both single. And we started talking again, and we started doing what you and I are doing now. Not to say that things are going to go the same direction with you. But we were essentially Zooming, Skyping at the time. And we spent several months doing that and decided we should see each other again. And we ended up meeting in Barcelona and going over to Rome. And we spent the year of 2010 just sort of meeting in all these wonderful places around the globe. And so she would fly from Russia. So she'd fly from Russia to Dubai. I flew from America to Dubai. And then we went from there to the Maldives. And eventually, I proposed, and she was kind enough to say yes and step up in my life's game. So she's been here, 10 years. We've been married for 10 years now. She's been here 11 years.
Oh,
We've been
wow.
married for 10 years, and it's been just amazing. You met her, but the people who really know her well know that she's just incredibly kind and funny and intelligent and obviously very beautiful, but just an amazing person and a great partner in life.
Yeah, that's great. It's so cool that worked out for you. And aren't you glad that you didn't become a priest? You must be thankful every day now.
Well, and that's why I didn't
Yeah.
become a priest, right? Is because I felt that I wanted ultimately to have a family. So yeah, yep.
Well, John, this has been such a pleasure to have this conversation, long overdue. And I really appreciate you. I know you're super busy taking the time to have this. And, we should do it once a year and just sort of touch base. We just punditry. I just throw all these issues at you, and you can tell me what you think, because it's fascinating. So, but thank you, John, and good luck with everything.
Thank you, Josh. It's always a pleasure to see you, and I'm hopeful that I will see you soon. So,
All right. Take care.
okay.
Thank you.
Bye.